No. We'll start our meeting back up with excuse me, I'm chewing. Sorry. With a report on one of our grant recipients from the MLIA, and I don't have my agenda.
I can introduce them.
Thank you.
No problem. If anyone's online, it's Erin Fashaway, State GIS Coordinator, and today we have with us Carl Hamming. He is from Powell County. He's a FY 2018, so fiscal year 2018 grant recipient, and he just recently wrapped up his grant project, and so he's here to talk to you about that today. So he is the Planning Director and Floodplain Administrator for Powell County.
Well, thank you, Erin. Thank you, Commission, for having me today. Hopefully it's okay if I just sit down and present kind of like this informal presentation here while you're all eating. I hear chips are a popular thing to enjoy right by the microphones, but just let me know if you can't hear me or if you want me to stand up and present more formally. But. All right, so right off the bat, I know typically you thank everyone at the end of the presentation, but I just wanted to mention with kind of the special circumstances of today that with Ken Wall here of Geodata Services, he was our consultant for this project. And so if you have any technical questions, something nitty and gritty, please turn over and look at Ken on that, just because I am, as Erin mentioned, the planning director. I work with the Parks and Trails, Floodplain Administration, Superfund stuff. The GIS portion of my job is actually pretty small, pretty minimal. And so I don't get to get my head into details as much as I would like with some of these things. So I do just want to make you aware that Ken may be able to answer some more questions at another break or at the end of the presentation. Also, just wanted to start with the geography of Powell County real quick, since this does factor into the urban versus rural divide and what we're looking at with emergency services as we look at the Next Gen 911. So I'm coming over today visiting from Deer Lodge. We're looking at a population of about 7,000 for the county. So obviously a pretty rural county in nature. And then, as most people know, statewide, Deer Lodge is the prison town, and so 1,500 people within our census is, well, located just a few miles west of town, and just an interesting component of our local economy. All right, so at the top of the slide here, preparing Powell County required data layers for Next Gen 911. That was the title of our MLIA grant. And a quick one-sentence purpose on it for Powell County. The project focused on GIS processing of the next generation 911, Next Gen GIS layers to prepare for a NENA compliant foundation and first draft set of GIS layers for future implementation of Next Gen 911. And so basically we're looking at the legacy 911 model and figuring out how we need to get it ready, get it prepped, get it prepared for the Next Gen 911 model, which is just a different standard. And so what does that entail? Historically, with urban addressing, you're thinking about, why are we shaking so much? Is that?
It's not you.
It's not earthquake.
Another one by Lincoln or something. Hopefully that's not bothering anyone. So with addressing, typically you're thinking of in a city, you've got your street addresses, everything's well signed. You see the street name, the address on the front of the building. It's a little more straightforward. But in many places, like in Powell County, where it's a little bit more rural, you've got to be thinking about how you're addressing a structure that could be miles off of the county road or state highway. And so that's really important when you're thinking about emergency services, making sure they know where they're going, what they're responding to, how they're getting there, and really who should be responding to an emergency. I mean, if you have something in the northern part of the county where you only have a couple of rural town centers, such as Lincoln, Obando, Sealy Lake, and you've got something at the southern edge of the mob, who's responding to that incident. I won't go into the details here of all these steps, but just wanted to lay it out that there is a lot involved here in the transition from the legacy to the next gen 911 model. And then also just highlight that with this, you see both a lot of data cleaning, data comparison, looking at the Excel spreadsheets, but then also towards the bottom of the slide, you see working with emergency service boundaries, neighboring counties, and state collaboration. So not only is there a lot of kind of the nitty-gritty data cleaning, data validation, but there's also the social component where you're working a lot with your sheriff, your fire warden, with the fire districts, neighboring counties as far as their emergency services. Just looking at these big picture items to make sure everyone in the county is well taken care of. So here's just a quick screen grab of what it looks like. This is an example from Teton County, but you're just seeing what the MSAG, Ken could tell you what it means or what the acronym is. I forget off the top of my head, but you're just seeing what happens when there's a call to 911. And so you just see it in this tabular fashion there. And then here's another screen grab looking at what happens or what goes into that process of going from the legacy 911 model on the far right over to the next gen 911 on the left there in the green. Just looking at some of the different components that have to be factored in, such as spelling out street rather than just having an abbreviation for it. And so sometimes you can do a big batch update, but a lot of these, when you're talking about thousands and thousands of records, there's going to be issues, there's going to be red flags. You're going to have to go in and individually take a look at some of these entries. And then again, just some more of the requirements for that next gen model. You're looking at the road center lines, the public safety answering point boundaries, the PSAPs there, and again, talking about the emergency medical services, law enforcement, fire, making sure all these boundaries are well stitched together and that we don't have any gaps or areas of no coverage within the county. And I mentioned that because a couple of years, so I've been with Powell County a little over 2 years now. About a year before I came on board, our fire warden was working with our GIS person at the time to fine-tune some of those fire service boundaries. And in doing that, they produced that map at the lower left. And you see quite a bit of the county is not actually within a fire district. And so in working with Ken and getting ready for the next gen, we realized we can't have these gaps. We've got to figure out a way to make sure all parts of the county are covered. Whether that's a state agency like the DNRC responding to something, these questions need to be asked. We need to find these answers to make sure we're at least able to respond when a call comes in with a Latin long from a place without a district. Yes.
Can you say what MSAG is?
Master Street Address Guide. It's a table. It's not a map. It's a table of streets.
Yeah, and so now when a call comes in, you can have that point on polygon to make sure you've got that coverage within the county. And then also county to county boundaries, make sure we're stitched together well, that we're not going to miss someone right on the edge there between Lewis and Clark County and Powell, for example. I guess this is basically what we've been already talking about, but just that point on polygon and making sure that our structures are well documented within our GIS layers, that we've got an accurate location for the residential structure or the barn if it's a rural site that's miles off of a county road or state highway again. So this is something that Geodata Services has helped us produce or helped us realize. They've been brilliant with some of their data analysis tools. They've been helping find where we've got those issues, where we've got red flags, where we've got to go in there and think about with both our local knowledge, but also just take a look at the various maps that we've got, the tools, and then also walk the street sometimes, just make sure our addresses are correct, in order, and well covered. And so you can just see there's just little issues that pop up with addresses, when there's an issue between the what's in the system for the MSAG versus what's in reality with some of these addresses. And again, I'll try not to get too detailed there, but just some nice comparison tools that help us identify these issues and then go back and clean it up. And then here's another one looking at where the one system would think the structure, residential structure, would be located versus what the actual address is for that range along the street. And so you can just help to, it helps when you can visualize it rather than trying to just look at an Excel spreadsheet of all these addresses and ranges and trying to understand where the issue is at. And then with that, we're starting to realize what our next steps are. Going through this process has been time consuming, and realizing that there's a bit more work to do. The state is going through the process right now of an analysis of where everyone's at, their status for that next gen model. And so Powell County hasn't received their report card yet on that, but we're expecting that soon, and we're hoping that we'll be in pretty good shape compared to others, but we know we still have some more work to do. And so we just put in for a Montana 911 Advisory Council grant that, as you can see, we built in 3,000 hours of additional work into that. That will both be the consultant and county staff working on that. So just continuing to try to move along with the transition to next gen. Unfortunately for me and the department, I've got a low-cost intern coming into the planning department for the spring semester, so I'm hoping to be able to utilize a lot of his time on this exact project. And with that, I'll just say thank you to the State Library, and thank you to Ken and Geodata. Are there any questions for me, or Ken, Aaron?
It was great having this, the tablecloth lifted up and seeing what kind of legs are holding the potato chips on the table. I mean, it's fascinating.
Yeah.
I mean, so as you said, this is happening all around the state. How many places is it not happening around the state where it should be?
I think many.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This preparation for the next gen 911.
There's more places now.
Let's see.
Right now.
You're comfortable in the bigger count, in the bigger populated areas, that you're going to need a 911 call.
But after this work, you still get 3,000 hours of work to do.
Well, it's continuous. It's going to be continuous from here on out. I mean, it's a lot to prepare and get your data ready. But then after that, it's real-time data correction. If someone moves, or if a subdivision is built, if a road closes, some of these things that are immediate that then needs to be communicated to dispatch or to law enforcement or to these emergency services, it's gonna need to be immediate changes. So
does Powell County have the infrastructure and the people to change things immediately?
Well, and that's actually one nice thing about working through this process, is it's given us that knowledge base to get to that point where basically Ken can turn it back over to us so we can keep that up to date. I mean, being Powell County, we don't have a lot of new subdivisions going in, so it is not too time consuming to do a new update like that. But we're hoping to work with our fire chiefs and our deputy sheriffs, as well as they're going out into some of the rural parts of the county to flag issues, or maybe do some road verification as far as where exactly it exists, or if some Forest Service roads are opening or closing, keeping that status up to date.
But this,
I want to step back on your question a little bit and say, what Aaron was talking about is once it's done, it's still never done.
I get that.
But even the getting data to the level for Next Gen 911, that's a process of doing assessments, seeing what the quality is, improving your data, doing another assessment. Did you get it all? Are there more things to improve? That kind of a process. We are doing this assessment right now as part of House Bill 61 from last legislative session that Carl mentioned for all counties. That'll be a starting point at least to hopefully some awareness for a lot of counties that may not have done anything at this point to say, hey, this is where you are and these are the things that need to be done. But shortly after that passed, we have a set amount of money in a specific task there, but a lot of the vendors we've talked to have already changed their processes from selling an assessment to selling tools so that you can do an assessment, you can reassess on your own after that first time and continue to improve. So we'll see, this is step one. Unfortunately, we would have liked to have seen more progress at the state level before this session came up. We think it's unlikely there's going to be much specific to this kind of improvement now, but at least with the plan being developed, the larger plan being developed over the next couple of years, and ideally something in the next legislative session that will facilitate that assessment improvement.
and meanwhile, all the data and all the updates for the data, I won't say lag, but have to follow the process that you outlined and the process that you went through. So certainly as statewide sort of data layers, there's going to be spotty amount of currency.
Yeah. I think the big thing is that it's going to shift the focus away from the data, like this thinking of the data set at a point in time and more of the process to make sure this continues to improve.
And does the state library have a role in that process?
It's somewhat to be determined. We know at least initially, from a statewide perspective, we have the highest quality that's maintained, most integrated data sets for the state. That doesn't necessarily mean that for any given location that we have the best data available. So that'll be part of it. How does that work in and integrate with our existing spatial data infrastructure? Is that going to change how we maintain data sets? Or is our main role to make sure that the work that we've already done isn't duplicated? And then figure out how we integrate with those processes to make sure the things that aren't sensitive that might be in these data sets continue to be accessible.
So a couple points on the sensitivity, because that was also mentioned in the land plan discussion, which we'll be talking about. And NISTIC, I think, as National States GIS Information Council, has taken an approach on this that civic addresses are public information. And that's why everybody we've been working with, and I think this is true, I mean, I've seen small rural local governments with medical information in their sort of data, which is very illegal. And big fines can be attached to that in the millions. And I've seen also people carrying phone numbers, which is a more understandable thing if you want to contact people of evacuation or something. But it's really important, I think, from the public's perspective, that the structured data be a civic address that is a public information. It's the address and it is public information. So it's an important thing that the counties need to be aware of and carry on so that these don't get stuck in the back office. There's the whole NextGen is going to internet based, not analog. Right now it's based on landlines. So half of the people in Montana, the map doesn't automatically pop up when the 911 call comes in. And so with NextGen, that map is going to follow them. We can go with them. And there's a whole nother piece beyond what Carl's doing, which is the local government. It's roads and addresses and emergency boundaries that is handled by the telecommunications industry and sort of in cooperation with the government in a way. That's called the NEAD. That's the whole black box part of this thing. That's how when the call comes to 911 and you're fishing on a lake or you're in the Bob Marshall Wilderness or you're driving on the interstate not at your house, that map will travel with you because it's coming with your phone. The GPS in your phone will pop that map up to the 911 people. So there's a lot of give and take with private sector telcos and public as well. A couple interesting anecdotes that I think are important to the library. A couple of rural counties in eastern Montana that don't have any GIS capacity, like I'm thinking of like Daniels and Rosebud County over in sort of the eastern part of the state, have structures that are mapped on their rooftop by the library in 2013, 2012 and 2013. So we've been, Michael Fashway and his structure coordinator, we've actively worked, as the state library has for years, getting structure locations on houses. And that data is proving now to be very useful. It's part of our MSDI structure that's really useful for these counties that are starting up to get started in a point of comparison. And just as a sidelight, we looked at that with Microsoft released their building footprint data for the country, and we've looked at that for several rural counties, and about 85% of the structures fall in those. It's every house in the country has been mapped by Microsoft by artificial intelligence, and there's other companies starting to do that now. So it's an interesting sort of confirmation of the great work the library has done. So it really is helpful. And one of the things that's going to come out of this in 2 or 3 years, however it happens, is going to be much more improved road structure, road layer and structures, which are 2 of our key MSDI framework layers. So
I don't want to diminish any of the work that Michael's done. He has coordinated a lot of that, and also staff here that have helped, but also that has been a great partnership with a lot of governments. And so, in particular, DES officials in many of the counties who he's worked with. So just a recognition that this is very ground up, crossing governmental jurisdiction lines. It's a great project. And one other quick thing, just to the sensitivity point, one thing we have seen related to that, not just because we started more recently to get 911 grants, but going back just to some of the grants that we've, or applications we've had submitted for address and structure updates. We've seen a lot of those that they want to collect photographs of the structures, and we've pushed back on that and said, if you're putting in for an MLIA grant, the idea here is that when you complete that, all of that data becomes publicly available. So we don't think you want those photographs to be publicly available. We certainly don't want that. That's not a critical part of our database. So you can do that project if you need to. In most cases, they expect their sheriff to have that data for whatever emergency purposes. You can do that. You can pay for it while you're riding along and doing the other stuff, but we can't pay for those photos.
I think one of the most interesting dynamics about this is it's not just Montana, everybody in the country is doing this, and in Canada for that matter. And it's 8,000 or plus local government entities that are responsible for this, not the state, not the federal government, which is an interesting thing for something as important as 911 and public safety. That's the way it's always been, and that's the way it will continue. But the part, and I don't know if I'm talking to Michael, I've looked at a couple of the counties have got their reports back from Digital Data Technologies, and Lewis and Clark shared theirs with me, and I looked at it. It's an incredibly good job that DTI is doing on those. But what they don't address is some of what Carl brought up, is that edge of the county, how do you stitch all this together? And that's where we have big questions on how we're going to, it gets to your question, Bruce, of what our role is. And I don't, the state library will have to, and the commission will have to deal with this in the future, because the awareness is there now. I mean, $6.8 million grant program, that raised the awareness way up among the local governments. And so there's more awareness, but there's a lot more that needs to be done. And honestly, most of the counties are going to go to a consultant and have them do it entirely for them. A few of them, like Carl, will do it themselves and maintain it themselves. But how they work together, not only on GIS, but how they buy equipment and get switching equipment and all that to make it work, is going to be, in the future, is going to be important discussion. And I don't think that's talked about or will be in the assessment. It's more county by county. And that's the bigger question, is how do we, put this together? Other states around us that are further along have either done it in a state agency or they've done it with a contractor. So we'll probably be in one of those two. Although the groundwork we've laid will maybe help to make that easier. I mean, what do you do when you get to the edge of the county? And Like Carl's got some houses that he maintains that are not in his county because the physical address is in Powell County, but the structure is in Missoula County or Lewis and Clark. That can't happen at NextGen. It'll cause the system not to work. So how do you fix those things?
And thinking about the state library's role, I mean, I always in my own head trying to fit the GIS part of our works into the library sort of language. I think that libraries have materials and they have services, and data is sort of materials, and this process that you were describing is sort of a service, and how that all fits into our agenda for how we see ourselves serving the citizens of Montana, where we have so many competing needs. I think it needs to be sorted out, and we need to kind of react to that. I need to get that clear in my mind, because clearly it just keeps getting more complicated. And it makes me crazy to think that Lewis and Clark has got great coverage and fill in the blank, Daniels County doesn't. I mean, I don't know, maybe they do, but it just seems to me that there's if you got good data, you got good data for the whole state, right?
I know, and that's that's part of the reason this time the origins of 911 it was more or less PSAP entering point by entering point establishment, and then even the same for enhanced 911. The sense now is that as NextGen comes into play, that it can't be like that. You can't expect your cell phone to work to a certain level of accuracy or be able to send text when you're at one point on I-90 and expect people to know, even if you put plastered signs everywhere, that at this point it's not going to work. That's just not conducive to emergency response, and so that's why we've been successful in getting more towards a statewide place. But it's similar with state boundaries too. It's going to be a big problem.
It really is cool to see how this all works, or to get a glimpse of how a corner of how all this works.
When I was in a similar spot just a couple years ago, I mean, I had never really thought that much about what happens when a 911 call comes in, and realize how much there is to it, and this whole update process. It's been fascinating, as you said, having the veil pulled away.
I assume there's no possibility to opt out of the database, is there?
You can. Everybody in Montana is at least doing the legacy. Half of North Dakota is not. You call the dispatch and they figure out how to get someone to you by hand, and that's big chunks of the country that still do that. I think all of Montana, I'm pretty sure, has gone to what we call legacy. It was called enhanced 911 at the time. So 15 years ago, a bunch of consultants in the state library was really a big part of that, pulled together this effort to match up. Then the gold standard was, can you match 95% of the addresses from the phone company, and find those addresses.
Well, I'm wondering more about an individual's right to opt out of having their home address collected, and I'm thinking, and I'm wondering how they handle it in Europe. With the new GDPR in Europe, a home address is considered part of that personal data, and in theory, at least, people could ask to have that deleted from.
Is that a home address alone or a home address with the name associated? Because that's the distinction.
It's one of the lists here. One of the items in a list of things that are considered a personal data.
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it has. In the flip side, like Carl has an area between Helmville and Coal Creek that, but you can tell us already, he has to go there with the sheriff. He can't go validate those addresses.
Area up here, it was unofficially subdivided in the 50s and 60s, and it's folks who basically want to live off the grid.
Exactly what I was thinking about.
Yeah, and so when we do have encounters with folks like that in the planning department, and we are always trying to at least collect some information for safety purposes, we do require that they at least have a structure address and have a pretty good sense of where that's located for wildfire concerns, or we do have shootings up there, or people will be half frozen in the winter and we'll have to send a sheriff up there in a snowmobile. And so we want to at least have a general sense of where they're at, or a pretty good idea of where they're at. But yeah, we get a lot of people who want private property rights, and they want their privacy, and they don't want local government sticking their fingers in their business.
But if Kenny and I live next to each other, with our garages sitting 30 feet apart, and my garage catches on fire, Kenning has an interest. I'm using that as a metaphor, obviously, but I mean we do have an interest, and so if I don't want my address to appear, there is a public interest in having my interest appear in that, and Kenning has a stake in that.
Absolutely. I mean, and that's where we approach it with the philosophical view, especially with like wildfire being the example that what you're doing on your property could quickly affect those surrounding you, and so it is a public safety issue.
Or fire, or water, or access, or just generally being a nuisance, cooking liver.
The rights of minors too. People have children.
It does edge over into that whole privacy thing, and that's part of why I think the NEAD, the cell phone part of this, is a black box kind of run by industry, is they are very concerned about it. I mean, it's not just our cell phones, it's your car is going to call into 911 when you have an accident through OnStar and other things. The sensors when you're in Target or Walmart, you're being tracked continuously by Bluetooth beacons. Those are part of it. Everybody's modem. My modems. I'm with Spectrum cable company. That modem in my house will be eventually part of this. The location of that modem will be part of this process. It's a whole Internet of Things, not just our cell phones. So it does get into a lot of issues with that, and that's why I think the civic address being a public thing is so. That's why NISJ is saying it's so important, so that we can. It's the same argument we have sometimes with the cadastral. People, or a number of people say, you have all my information on my property taxes, and you can bring that up on the website, and they freak out, because of that. So it's a concern we all have to deal with.
Well, sir, are there any more questions or discussion, so we can move forward with our agenda?
I just want to take a moment to acknowledge staff, and Carl, thank you so much for coming. To put this in a little bit of context, I can't remember when we had the first Next Gen 911 grant application. It's been at least a couple of grant cycles that the commission has approved these kinds of grants, and so we've seen enhancement work happening. We're in the middle of the GIS assessment, actually nearing the conclusion. We're hoping by the first part of the spring that statewide GIS assessment will be done. We'll share the report with this commission. In terms of other roles that the state library has played, we've been talking to the Department of Administration through MLIAC for 3 or 4 years now, raising the awareness that GIS data has to be a part of Next Gen 911. It was the state library that recommended that the state have a Next Gen 911 plan, so that we can begin to think about these issues on a statewide level. The grant application that Carl's putting in for to continue with the enhancement, this is the first time 911 monies have been made available for GIS data development and enhancement, and again, that's because of our staff advocating to have that opportunity available to them. So, there's been years of work and really, really great progress, I think, with the assessment, and I hope the 911 plan, that will help us further inform how we can structure the land plan and the grant program to make sure that some of those monies are available to continue to meet the state's Next Gen 911 goals. So, there's continual progress that we're seeing, and I think we can be really proud.
One other brief thing, because I think is important for the commission, is that those required layers are part of MSDI, but the work we do, this weaves through all of it. Many other things as well. The work on the core stations, that is going to be an important part of this. The work we do with our hydrography layer and elevation is a really important part. So those aren't required by the local governments, but they're going to all be used because every 911 center is going to have many more map capabilities. So it ties into most of our JS work. Thanks, Carl. Good job.
Thank you, Carl.
Thank you. Thanks for the
Thank you very much.
Stay safe out there.
Looked a little snowy.
Was it snowing?
Yes, something happened that wasn't supposed to happen.
Oh, yay.
Snowing sideways.
Yeah. Oh, is it really? Why is it always this December heating?
I don't know, and the forecast is like 10%. Yeah.
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 Thought, oh, this will be a good
I'll be in
one.
touch. There's some stuff I got to talk about anyway. Good things.
All right, so we will move down our agenda to Erin Fashaway. She'll be talking about the 2020 Montana land plan.
Do you want me to pull up the land plan or?
I think everybody has it in your meeting materials.
Okay. So, so you have the land plan, the FY20 land plan in front of you. When the council started developing the land plan a year ago, we wanted to try to kind of change our strategy. Instead of rewriting a plan every year, we were trying to go for a plan that could last multiple years, and then if refreshments needed or pieces were needed to be added or taken away, we could do that. So there's not going to be a lot of major changes from last year's land plan because we're trying to be more consistent so that we can measure the successes in a longer period of time rather than having to constantly rewrite this plan because according to statute we have to write it annually. So we've the council adopted the plan. Some of the major changes that you will see are the MLIA, the Montana Spatial Data Infrastructure priorities. I asked all the stewards to give me their top 3 or top 2 priorities, so those have changed. And then there is a piece on researching and working with stakeholders regarding the statewide RTN network in the GIS coordinator section. And and the other one that I apologize I missed was before that in the plan, in the actual grant priorities, we've taken out, I guess we've added a 4th priority, and it's improvement of water information. So we had land information before, and in the hopes of trying to get more activity in the realm of water data creation and updating our MSDI layers, we've added a new category. It's not new to the plan historically. We've had it in there before. We're just trying something different this year. So if you have any questions or you need further information on anything, please let me know and I can answer those. Or
I just say one thing to your point there about water. 3 or 4 years ago, we had added in a more general natural resource category, and we emphasized water, but we didn't really provide a lot of specific guidance on water. We got a lot of water and sewer grants, and those don't really fit in with any of our existing framework layers. And so we took that out because they were not scoring well and not providing a lot of improvements to the overall, especially the infrastructure. But we continue to hear the importance and value for local governments of getting their irrigation ditches, canals, all mapped in that infrastructure. So we're trying putting a more specific, targeted recommendation as far as our.
So what you need is a motion to adopt the plan as modified.
Mm-hmm. Yes, please.
And it would be the plan for the biennium?
No, it's still an annual plan.
It's an annual plan.
Yeah, it's still we still have to follow the annual plan, but what I wanted to just communicate is there's not many changes since last year.
I would so move.
Second.
Thank you, Bruce and Kenny. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions?
Should it be a
Thank
2-year
you.
plan?
Should it be a 2-year
Statute.
plan?
Oh, it's by statute.
Yeah, it's in statute that it's an annual plan. We just I mean, we've even thought about 5 years, but I think it's something where I like the method we're using now to possibly write it with the intention of 2 to 5 years. Technology changes so often though that I don't know, 5 might be a little long. So it would be nice to fit with the biennium.
But the priorities do sort of carry on.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think we see, as we've seen with Next Gen 911, continual incremental progress, and the plan structure can account for that. One of the things that we keep talking about doing is being very deliberate in our planned approaches to these priorities that do carry forward. So where we identify really significant need for Next Gen 911 or PLSS updates, let's not waste a lot of time with administrative bureaucracy. Let's, through the plan process, address those concerns.
There is, with that annual cycle, there is a benefit in that we can take, part of the ultimate goal here is, in addition to our overall big priorities, taking feedback from the grant review committees each year, where they are highlighting things that are difficult for them to evaluate or problematic fitting into the whole process, and improve the plan each year based on some of that.
Okay, any other comments for Aaron? I guess I was a little confused. Are there 2 actions here?
Yes, there is another action.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Okay. Oh no, it was this. And
Yes, those are
Okay.
2 separate actions. Yeah.
thank you.
My next one does.
Yes.
The next presentation I want to give is our legislative report to the upcoming legislature on the Montana Land Information Act. And 2 years ago, we received approval to create a legislative report in story map form, first one ever. I'm not sure if anyone else is doing it in the nation. Let's just say that. And so we decided to continue to use this process to make it a little more interesting and interactive. And so we kept this a similar format as last year, and I tried to add some of the newer technology, and then of course some of the PR campaign media that we have received thus far. So this is a story map. If you're not familiar with what a story map is, it's a tool to communicate your message via map or website or photo or video. So it's a really great interactive tool that we have available to us under our enterprise license agreement with the company named Esri. And so this is the intro slide. And I don't know how much you actually want me to go through. I can pull up the I can kind of so this is what the legislators will see when they first get here, and we can show the video, or how would you like me to present this?
Yeah, so just a couple of highlights. If you do scroll down, you'll see some of the information from the public awareness campaign that launches. Hey, people have seen this one.
Has everyone seen it?
Yeah. So,
Okay.
one of the things we wanted to make sure and highlight is information about the budget cuts that we took. So we added information about the biennium budget cuts to give the legislature an understanding of the funding that's available right now to fund this work. It links to information that was developed as we were going through the budget cuts. And then it calls out the specific positions that were lost that support our GIS work. And then in the information about the Montana Spatial Data Infrastructure, we identify the 2 current themes that are at risk right now because of the loss of staff, that being transportation and geographic names. So when you look at that information, we identify that we don't currently have the staff capacity to support the updates and maintenance of those key themes. And then Aaron, why don't you just take them through the Land Information Act?
Is this available online now?
Yep. It's linked. Yeah,
So
linked.
in the memos, there's actually a
Oh, I missed that.
and I missed that as well.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, so you have access to this.
So I try to just reorganize to make it a little more efficient and use some of the newer technology that Esri has put out there. And so the act itself, you can break it down into different sections. You have the code itself, so it will take a legislator straight to the code. So I think that's pretty informative for those that aren't familiar with what the act entails. And then the council basically takes us to a page that has all of our council representatives on there. And I think that's really great so that our legislators can see who is active on the council or who is on the council and contact them for more information. So this is basically straight from our council's web page. And then next would be just a link to the plan itself. So after this, I'll just, this meeting, I'll just say that it was approved by the commission on this day, but other than that, this is going to stay the same, so they'll have a direct link to our land plan. This is the most recent report that we've given to MLIA Council on our collections, so it's an example of some of the reports that we do have available. And so here's another, it's a 2-page report, and so this, we monitor collections that come in to the state, and we display it monthly and by year. So you can see the breakdown of what those collections look like on a monthly and annual basis. And then last but not least, this is the grant program. So last year, I do believe last session, the report only focused on local government and tribal government grants, and so this year I've added the state recipients, and I've broken out local government, so I actually have a point now for a city or town that has received a grant, and then the counties and tribes that have received grants are highlighted in different colors. And if you click on one, you can see I highlighted a little bit of information. So the city of Fort Benton, it's the current grant that they have going on right now. It's an infrastructure grant. It was ranked number 5. They were awarded $19,000, and the status is in progress. So pretty basic information. But we're trying to utilize more maps in our reports to the council, and so this is something that I want to try to keep up and have constantly available if people want to know what's going on with the grant in their area. And then the dissemination of data is just a few different examples of how we push our data out there. The #1 place for data searches when it comes to geographic information in the state of Montana is our data list. And then and so you can go in there and you can search. This is a live link to the website itself. So I actually, if I'm curious, I can type in cadastral. I can type in cadastral.
Oh, you can type it in.
I can. It's doing something. There we go. Okay. Well, I got impatient and I clicked on something instead. But technically from this, you could download the geographic names framework or anything else that you click on. And then, so it's really neat that you were able to embed a website into this story map. And then I've got the actual cadastral application here that is also interactive as well. So just another way to kind of repackage some of our more used applications that display or run off of our MSDI layers. And then this is a pretty popular map that I created just to show the differences between imagery data sets that we've received for 2015 and 2017. So on the right is 2017. Let me just zoom out a little. It's very basic. We didn't want to put too much information out there, but you can see the burn scar. So this is the Lodgepole complex fire, and so it's so significant from year to year. So I love this map, this type of story map, the swipe. So
Wow.
it's pretty significant. And then, you know, you can, let's see, there are certain areas in Billings where it's just growing immensely, and to see the change between the 2 years is really great. To see the houses come up, and some of them you can even see them in the middle of being built, and then if you look at the 2017 imagery, it's full on blooming neighborhoods. So that's a really powerful tool itself. And then, of course, we have the Heritage Map Viewer as well that someone could go in and look at and use their website. And each of the applications, we've tried to highlight some of the MSDI themes that are used, and those are on the left-hand side in the little mini explanations about each tab there. So, are there any questions? And the spatial data infrastructure one looks pretty similar. I showed it with the at-risk layers, but it goes through all 15 layers, and there's a map for each one.
Aaron, have you gotten feedback from legislators or anybody about this?
Initially, the staff said, "Oh, this will be cool.
Mm-hmm.
It won't be something that gets put on a shelf and gets dusty." That was what they said was.
Mm-hmm.
But I actually never heard anything. But I don't know if they. No one's ever asked me to come present this, so I don't know how these reports are given to the legislature.
Well, and if it comes in a memo like this, at
Yeah.
least two of us admitted to not clicking on the link, you know,
Yeah.
so.
Yeah.
Yeah, we submit it through legislative staff, so I obviously don't know what form they're given in.
So this is the kind of thing where you want to have a big screen and, you know, a mouse and just put it in the rotunda and let people, and have some, you know, a party planner sit there and show people how it works, because it's fun in addition to be.
When you did a paper one, did they, or an analog one, did you send one enough for each legislator, or
No, it was always digital.
Mm-hmm.
it was always digital,
Mm-hmm.
like a PDF or something?
Yeah. Exactly.
I think it's great, and you've improved it from last year significantly. My only question is, I looked at it yesterday on my iPad, and there's issues because of with these two styles, particularly the Cascade, the introduction, they don't work well on mobile devices. Imagine most legislators are not pulling out their phone to look at websites typically.
When I looked at it just now with my iPad, it scrunched stuff up.
Yeah, well, it's just, you know, there's some things we can talk about later about maybe you can put in photos for some placeholders so they don't go. The only part I thought was the introduction. The videos don't show up, and it takes you kind of to a dead end. So I don't know if that's a big deal, but it is a really good job.
Okay. On your mobile device.
Yeah.
Is it work? Are you using Chrome?
Yeah.
And it still does that?
Yeah.
Okay.
But it's it's really good. I think it's neat because it gives people interactivity.
Would this be something you would want to, work with MLA to educate librarians if they're getting their legislators into the library to maybe pull this up for them?
It's not a bad idea. I never thought about it. Yeah.
So
if they have the audience, certainly. Everybody's speaking well about us.
I would say the MLAT grant recipients to make them aware.
Yeah.
Or we can have a
Make
booth again this year at MLA.
Oh yeah.
Maybe we should just have a big screen with this up.
Sure.
have this up during our library legislative night.
Yeah.
You know, definitely need this to be happening.
Yeah.
So people can come over and, click on it themselves. I think would be really great.
Yeah.
But have someone here to guide them.
Yes.
The other thing I wondered is a small thing, but in the 2019 biennium budget cuts, when I first looked at that page, I mean, I'm pretty wonky, but it didn't really tell the story too much because of maybe even having a couple of bubbles up there to explain what the blue, I mean, it's down at the bottom, but I'm not sure I didn't understand it at first, even though I sit on the commission.
I could shift the legend. If that's what.
Sure, or tell maybe a couple of bubbles about it or something.
Yeah, you might want to put the legend at the top. I think when I was looking at it, it might have pushed out off the main page.
It's also really helpful for grant recipients to have referenced or have access to this, because like one of the questions, and the ones I've looked at, often people don't know if they've gotten, if there's so much turnover and transition. It's really useful to see what past grants have come in for folks.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So this is an action item. Are we going to make an action with suggested changes, or?
I move that we officially declare this super cool.
I'll second the motion.
So unfortunately, we need you to actually motion what we're motioning to approve this to send out to approve the story map. So it is super cool.
I
As a
think it's
comment.
okay to just approve it because you've heard, what you've heard the ideas, and you can do what you can do.
Sure.
Obviously, it pulls in a lot of other things. It's a mashup, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Right.
things could change on some of those components. Once they're completely out of our control. There are some that are.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you may not be able, responsive design might not work for every single thing, but you'll do what you can do, with what feedback was.
Well, and
Yeah.
like
Yeah,
all
but I would just
documents in this way, they're living.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It's not like a PDF that once you create it, it's kind of a dead document.
Yeah.
You can make it a motion.
I'm going to move to approve it.
Okay, thank you, Anne. Thank you, Kenny. Thank you, Marlis. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Any other comments?
I really would encourage you to seek out presentation opportunities where you can show this, because I think people will be really impressed with this.
Yeah, I guess I could call over to my friends at the legislature and ask them.
Yeah.
The staff, not legislators themselves, but ask them what happens, where the process goes once we kind of hand it off. Where does it go after that?
I agree.
I feel like we've gotten positive feedback from the legislative staff.
Yeah.
The staff, we always get really positive comments.
Could also-
Maybe at in an interim committee, something like that, there'd be a chance to present on it.
Do you guys issue press releases?
Yeah.
Is this the kind of thing you could issue a press release about?
Sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. And, and the land plan itself.
Yeah. We do have we could send it to Sesso and ask Senator Sesso, who sits on our council, to see what his opinion is, to see if it makes it to his desk or something that's, maybe have him bring it up to people.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion.
I guess I'm thinking, get this out into the public sphere, not
Mhm.
the public will hopefully drive the legislators.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when all the PR campaigns, media is finalized, we could create a story map to include that stuff. So
Yeah, that's a great idea.
There's some opportunities that, to think about this slightly differently. I mean, for instance, for this the biennium budget cuts, state library general fund appropriations and land information account collections, FY 2013 through FY 2019, perhaps a little long. And a marketer or someone would treat that maybe like a headline. Collections drop in FY 17 due to or leaving mappers without ink for their pens, or I think that there's some opportunities to make some editorial points here to try to more directly sell your message.
I think I might choose that opportunity in a press release rather than in a report that's going to the legislature.
But even still, there's some basic labeling, headline things that some of us with limited attention spans might find trouble with.
Okay, thank you, Erin,
Thank
so
you.
much. It's wonderful.
thank you.
This is, if we just had money to hire a marketer.
Evan?
Can I steal one moment as we close this out? I pondered talk about this in the state librarian's report, but I knew that we were going to talk about these things, and I thought this was probably a better time. You have the digital library report. You'll notice everything on there is green.
Yeah.
And I just want to be sure, I want to step back and say, project-wise, things are moving along very well. But of course, one of the challenges we've talked about when it comes to those reports is those are showing projects or initiatives, and they don't necessarily talk about the day-to-day work. And so I just want to come back because, you guys had asked many times when we were facing the cuts, and now that we're well into this, there are two things that stand out clearly here, and that's the transportation layer and the geographic English framework. And those, from the initiation of the cuts, we knew those were going to be a couple of the most challenging. And from an internal management perspective, we actually want to we don't want to continue what we were doing with those. We already know, part of the reason that those work is not getting done is we lost the staff that worked on those. But the other piece is that we're not doing it that way anymore. We would look to hire somebody to maintain those individual layers. We're taking more of a team approach to all of this. And in that, we had already discussed internally the idea of reviewing each of those and determining if we're doing it the right way, if there are new ways of doing things that can make it more efficient or improve the quality of those data sets. So, but we thought we would at least have the ability to do some of that work during this biennium, and we're coming to the close, and we simply don't have the staff there. I don't say that to push you to make any action, but I bring it up, where I'd say we are right now is let's see what happens with the legislature. But know that if we don't have FTE restored, we aren't able to bring in more GIS support for the digital library, that those are going to continue to struggle. So that's the main thing. Second, and related to that, I don't want to get too far into detail here for you, but the other big area that we have struggled has been the CAD and SDI update process. And I say we struggled, but I say we struggle because we put out a desire to have annual updates every July, and we're well off of that schedule. I've mentioned this before, but in the first year, it was October, November. So last year, October, November, before we were able to do that. This year, we just got CAD and SDI updated. We're hoping to have the associated layers updated over the next month or two. So we're pushing back another month. At this point, again, I'm not asking for anything. I'm just letting you know where we stand on these things. What I'd like to do is wait until that refresh gets done and then work with our leads to talk about whether we need to make some changes there to get back to that July schedule. We had a plan for this year to improve that, but the fact that it's taken so long to get last year's done is kind of impeding our ability to improve that plan. So we'll be looking at that, and I'll just keep you updated on how things go for now. And the main thing will be if we decide to make changes there, and then whatever happens with the legislature.
And to add to that, kind of come full circle with MLIA, is that if it takes us, if we're out of schedule, then it affects our grant recipients. So our grant recipients that are out there collecting new control to update their parcels or their boundaries, it's taking longer for that information to then be integrated into ours. Right now, it's at least a year. And so that's really hard that sometimes is a hard concept for county commissioners to understand. And so it's something I'm having to constantly explain. It's like, they think it's immediate, but it's heavy work involved.
I think the big one is, for example, if we go to Mako midwinter in January, and you talk to the commissioner and they say, the parcels are really off in our county. We'd really like to see that improved. And we say, well, we've got a process you can put in for a grant. Well, they've already missed that year's grant deadline. So they're going to have to wait till the next year to put in a grant. and then they're not going to get the grant until the next fiscal year. And then they're going to have to work on that grant for a year, and there's probably going to be another year before it gets integrated into our data sets. So you could
it's a long time.
Yeah, 3 to 4 years in a good case scenario to see that data updated. So, these are things we'll continue to look for ways to improve it, but that's part of why we try really hard to get that annual cycle worked out. And in a perfect world, once we can do that, we'll try to do it faster.
Yeah, and I would say that there's a lot of really smart people working for us, and that we're constantly trying to improve our efficiencies, and we're constantly examining whether they like it or not, and make them new schedules. And how could we? And there's got to be a way to improve this process, and so we're constantly thinking. Right now, because we're short-staffed, it's a little harder, and we rely on technology to help us with that. But at the same time, it is just a heavy workload. And right now, with one of the positions we're in with the grant that just finished up for FY 2018, it was a 10-year phase grant project for Park County, and they're doing really well. And for FY 2018, we said, let's give you more money. Let's speed the process up because it takes us a long time. And speeding the process up has gotten us to a point where now they want to see the changes that have been made, and we can't show them that. So they're in a position to say they could be ahead of schedule. They are ahead of schedule, but they don't know if they're going to fill out a grant for next year. So it's this. We're going to try to do the best we can to answer the questions and look at the technology to see where the adjustments have been made. But it's a point where we're like, okay, so now that process doesn't work for multi-year grants that are back to back. So now we have to rethink it. So.
From this seat, that sounds an awful lot like the discussion we had earlier about the shared catalog. It's the same thing happening.
Mm-hmm.
And so I suspect you would agree that it's a combination of more people would be helpful, more efficiency would be helpful, but it's actually going to be a combination of continuing to work to gain efficiency and getting a few more warm bodies.
I would say so, yeah. I think we're using cutting edge technology, I guess you could say, managing it. So we're using the latest and greatest, the tools that are out there that are supposed to be more efficient. We have very great partnerships with the federal government right now and local government, and I think that really helps. Probably like 7 years ago, we were behind 5 years with updates from the BLM. That's no longer the case. And so I think we're positioned very well to do a lot of really great things if we had a few more bodies, I think.
So when it comes time to talk about priorities, we'll talk about this.
Is it, maybe that's a better time to talk about this, but in the bigger picture, there are some MSDI stewards that are not directly library employees. Like DNRC does fire districts, for example. And I've never understood why, well, I kind of understand, but why DOT isn't the steward for transportation layers, since they're probably the second biggest agency in the state. But what's the process? I know there's a GIS managers sort of informal group that gets together. What's the process for that kind of collaboration beyond the library, of us being the sort of stewards for the data and establishing standards and making sure it meets that, where we don't actually do the actual work on a layer?
With state government.
Yeah, with state government and local government.
So we do have the GIS Managers Forum that meets regularly, and I've been trying to participate more with ITMC. So that's the Information Technology Managers Council. It's a governor's appointed council. So CIOs sit on that, and it's very heavily attended. So any kind of new policy or contractual or anything new happening with ESRI, we try to bring to that council. And so we work with agencies, with technical leads, and then management, whether that's a GIS manager or a CIO, to help build policy. Some of the ones we're kind of maybe thinking about addressing next year with the managers forum is possibly an address standard. Some of the other things we're talking about looking at, or it's coming up, is drone usage and data policy surrounding drone data collection. That's kind of being pushed more by MDT, but we do collaborate often. And so I would say that that method would be to work with those technical leads, develop a policy, make sure that that policy is then okay with those separate agencies that could be developing it, and then work with ITMC to implement it in that capacity. With local government, I would be working with probably MACO first, and then League of Cities and Towns, including NAGIP or NISJIC, depending upon what the topic is.
And when it comes specifically to themes, while there's only a subset of 8 themes that we directly and almost fully, boundaries and construction there, are the stewards for. We have our hands in almost every one of them. The biggest exceptions would be climate and geology. Although we do regularly communicate and work with both the climate office and the Bureau of Mines and Geology. So there hasn't, many years ago there were, I wouldn't say regular, but there were a handful over maybe 5 years, a handful of theme lead meetings, and we haven't done that in quite some time. Again, I'd put that out there. I know Aaron's had the idea. I'd suggest that's been an issue. We just don't have the time to do that right now. I think maybe if we are able to get more administrative support to help out with the grant process, then maybe that's something that we can bring back. But at the same time, like I said, almost all these, even those soils, for example, and hydrologic units are headed by the NRCS through our relationship with Catherine Maynard and the local office here. We're very heavily involved in the maintenance of that, wetlands and land cover, of course, your heritage programs. So we're directly involved with those as well. So we do have a pretty good grasp of the status of those. And I think as we're able to get our feet under us, maintaining what we have, we'll be in a better position to look at the overall. Are there, maybe we'll be back to some of those discussions of reviewing themes. Some of that also is should be the work of the council. We've tried to push that in the last year or two.
It is a priority.
It is priority in the land plan for the council to review.
Okay. Thank you guys so much.
Thanks.
Well, we will move on to our commission goals and objectives. And so we have the work plan. And as you guys saw, that we are still yellow in our planning and reporting.
And I can give just a little bit of an update there. Our staff is continuing to meet regularly to talk about the reporting system. As I've told you in the past, we're taking a subset of our data to try to evaluate and test both a database structure and then some data visualization tools. So we're largely focused right now on data that pertains to the shared catalog, because we have quantitative use statistics, we have quantitative data about cost, we have data about the number of tickets, for example, that staff are responding to help administer the catalog. We also have qualitative data about just the nature of the requests, the nature of any kind of consulting work that's going on. So it poses a significant challenge for us to think about how we can build a data structure that would allow us to bring together these different kinds of data metrics and then answer specific kinds of management questions. So, cost relative to use. One of the things that'll be more challenging for us is staff time relative to use per library and how that might impact cost. And then on top of the database structure, We've looked at Tableau. We've played just a little bit with Insights, although Insights is not going to be available through the state ELA anymore. And staff are right now looking at a tool from Microsoft called Power Business Intelligence BI, Power BI. So I think staff are gaining a comfort level with the database structure necessary to support a reporting system. I think we need to talk a little bit more about whether or not we just sort of bite off adopting a visualization tool and begin working with it, or how much time we spend investigating these different tools that are out there. One of the things that staff are looking into right now is whether or not tools like Tableau and Power BI have the ability to collect automatic feeds from different kinds of reporting tools. For example, we know that they can harvest from Google Analytics. It doesn't sound like they have the ability to harvest from the Circe Dynamics system, Blue Cloud Analytics, but we've heard that potentially other libraries around the country might have people developing code to help with some of that kind of work. So I would say that we're making incremental progress there. You'll see once we start talking about some of our staff priorities, if we're able to hire staff, would be a kind of a data management and reporting position that would help with some of this kind of work.
Is it wrong-headed to think like I'm thinking, which is, if we don't have staff to welcome people willy-nilly into the shared catalog, and if we're behind the 8 ball with our GIS data, maybe this takes a significant second priority?
The list of staff priorities is not prioritized.
Not
So yeah,
thinking about
absolutely.
the new staff, but just in terms of what we have in our plate today, it seems to me while this is important, and while if it was out there, we might actually be able to garner more support to get more staff. It just strikes me that if your canoe is sinking, the first thing you do is bail out the canoe, and then you look around and figure out what comes next.
Yeah.
Because in many ways, it feels like we're still the fire's out, but we're still dealing with the results of last session, and we ought to feel we not welcome that, but that is true, and that should be okay with us. That's how I feel about it.
I guess if we're speaking specifically about this project, the staff work are not the shared catalog staff. They're not the GIS staff. So I don't know, managers might feel a little bit differently, but I don't know that we're necessarily detracting from other work for this particular project.
I mostly agree. I'd say to this point, just the progress we've made has not caused problems as far as GIS staff for other projects. And part of the reason that we're looking very closely at the opportunities for these tools to harvest from existing sources of analytics is that we don't have the staff time. Well, any staff time we put into data aggregation or other restructuring for a tool like this would have to take away from something else. And I don't think anybody wants that.
And the data that we're collecting, we need to be collecting anyway. Tracy wants her consultants to be collecting data about their consulting visits so that we can learn from and improve that process. And right now we don't have a system to collect that data and aggregate it in any meaningful way. So, there's certainly business needs for this kind of system that goes beyond just being able to have something to report to the commission.
And I think in addition to learning from and improving the process, you're also demonstrating the needs, right? So that you can go out and make an argument for the needs that aren't being met.
So if I could jump in, reassure you was, Jenny's correct. I have to collect this data to report to the Institute of Museum and Library Services for our annual report on how we spend LSTA funds.
And do we need a separate tool to present this, present this data to IMLS?
No, not necessarily for that. Part of my initial reason for wanting this project was that I could tell there were inefficiencies in the way that we collect our data and where we put it that cost us significant time around this time of year. And I wanted to look for a more efficient way to collect that data that was not cumbersome for staff, but helped us meet our grant obligations. Plus, that's data that I do find interesting and valuable as a manager for making decisions about what to recommend to you. But I think part of this, tips into the visualization for the reasons that others have mentioned is when you have the right tools, you learn a lot. Like just me mapping some of the things I've mapped over the last few years helps me see the data in a much different way, that it makes it frankly much easier for me to talk to legislators about our impact and what we do. Because I've literally mapped the data and I can say with confidence we reach every county in Montana and almost every community through library services. And so it's kind of a chicken and an egg thing. If we were trying to collect data that we don't already collect for that purpose of the LSTA annual report, I would think you are totally justified in asking your question, and it's a good question. But because we are really pretty much using data that we collect for that and for the public library statistics, we're not creating more work for staff. We're looking for a way actually to streamline that workload and then have the payoff of a tool and a system that allows us to communicate why that makes a difference, why it adds value, and why it should be funded.
I accept that. It's just that we've been going around the same pole for 4 years now with no progress that I can see, and yet we have all these other sort of pressing things. And I was just trying to say, don't sweat this, but you're saying we should sweat it, so I listen to you.
Well, I think Jenny too, you were kind of maybe had some middle ground in saying how much time do we spend in picking a tool, and when do we just pick a tool because we don't have any more time? That's a hard question.
Yeah.
And so I know it's more for the public library statistics, but could some of that LSTA funding, the tool you find for the public library statistics, could that help the state library in any way?
We asked the vendors 2 or 3 years ago when we were asking the question about whether or not we should go to a vendor system for doing the statistics, because the statistics tool was at the time so heavily integrated into the library directory and we were facing a rewrite of the library directory, if those vendors could do all of that. And they said no, that the library directory and all of that work is so far more sophisticated than anything they do around the public library statistics, that's just not in their wheelhouse. The thought has certainly occurred to me that we come to the commission with a trust request and hire a consultant to build something for us. And I don't know that would necessarily free up staff time, because it's still our staff that have to provide the input on the data that we collect and the management questions and decisions that we want some kind of system to be able to support.
And there's overlap with this process and the process of the $10,000 that was okayed for the public library staff to MLS. Is that correct? Potential overlap.
Potential overlap, yep.
I mean, in the limited solicitation, one of the things I stated was I had to be able to get the data out in a format that would allow us to use whatever tool, visualization, reporting tool we end up using. And that is where that data will live. And, that was a hard decision. I mean, I went back and forth with Jenny many times because there was real value and real power in us having the data in-house. And as, Jenny stated, we had tools that could do more than what current vendors can do. But I came to that recommendation because of that capacity issue.
How long has this review of the 3 visualization candidates been going on?
I mean, we started that, 1.5 years, 2 years ago? it's not gone on continuously in that time.
I've talked about it for a while, probably ever since I went to the Revolt the Research Institute for Health Climbers and came back. And I think I would say I felt like I was spending my first year focusing on the success and outcomes and impacts. And then I felt like we were getting better at that, but we weren't very good at the part where you collect the data to figure out whether or not you're achieving those outcomes, and you have a good way of sharing it with others. And I think that was probably about the point when I came to Jimmy probably about a year ago and said, I need help with this part to get us through this process so that we're using our data wisely. And honestly, using it to make a case for more funding and things like that. Because I think fundamentally what we're up against, of course, is we need more resources, human and financial. How do we get that? And I guess for me, I feel like this is part of how you get that.
Tell the story in a better way.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
So I guess I'm not understanding what barriers there are to making a decision for one of these three.
Cost and staff time to.
Meaning cost, meaning that none of them are viable?
Some are more viable than others, and just understanding the licensing costs and then prioritizing it in our budget. The state licenses Tableau. I think the cost it's not unreasonable, but it's not budgeted right now. So reprioritizing budget to cover something like that.
So the state licensing Tableau gets you a discount, or it doesn't get it to you free?
It doesn't get it to us free, no. I'd have to look into the exact cost differences between what it would cost to license on our own versus going out there, but there's some discount.
I think there are some things that you get free, like I think you can do the desktop, right? But that's not. But just because I can make a graph, I can make a graph for you. So the idea of being able to integrate this into a reporting system, you're going to want the server, and that doesn't come free through the state license. Cost.
We have been evaluating Insights because it's an Esri tool and it has some greater capacity with the mapping help, but now with the newly proposed ELA, that's not going to be an offering, so I suspect we'll suspend that use. But we just don't have a lot of staff time to spend researching all of the other tools that are out there.
But my proposal, which I will try to state more directly, of just forgetting about it for 6 months is not a reasonable proposal. You can't afford to do that.
I would personally say I don't know that there's any benefit to some of the other staff pressures that we're feeling from suspending this. This is largely our IT staff that are doing this work.
And I really, and I hesitate to even suggest that because how you manage staff time is clearly your business. Because I would just hate for you to think from one commissioner at least that there was a huge rush on getting this complete if there are other competing priorities. But I'm hearing that some of the other commissioners see more value in this than I do, and it sounds like there are other competing priorities. So that's good.
Yeah,
we just doesn't ever resolve.
I mean, in some ways, it's a little bit like this dates me, but when portable computers became available, a lot of companies jumped on that and made these big leaps over folks that had this large investment in big mainframes. And to some extent, that's happening with this. I mean, the reporting, the idea of webhooks and all these different web services talking to each other is just exponentially ballooning. And so in some ways, not deciding on a solution maybe is good in the sense that new solutions are coming up that may be more appropriate. But I think they're going to be those kind of, like Kevin was saying, those kind of web links, those ways that you harvest and pull these things together from multiple sources. And to me, the best reporting is reporting that you do without even thinking about it as part of your daily routine, that you can then grab that and aggregate it and turn it into useful information on trends. And, I tend to, I've said this, I think, a couple times before, but and I'm always, kind of Esri-centric in thinking. And I mean, maybe you can't. I mean, Insights it costs me as a business $500 a year for a single seat, and not everybody needs to have it, but that combined with something like the Survey 123 Connect, which is based on open XLM source, you configure with a spreadsheet, but it has a ton of background capability. It's actually a kind of a sleeper in Esri because it's run by the same team in China and in Australia that runs their app development builder, where you build an app on a device like this, and then you can replicate it on other devices. So it's a pretty good team, because not all Esri teams are that good in that sense. But having someone learn that tool, and I realize we don't have any flexibility with staff as it is, but it might be something to think about and talk about recouping these 9 positions. But someone who could be sort of the data collection reporting expert that could also work with other agencies and stuff makes a lot of sense to me, because it has all these, it collects 30 to 40 behind the scenes metadata information with everything you collect, and it's very flexible, way more flexible than it's like SurveyMonkey, but with a lot more background capability. And it has a bunch of web links in the back that you can, based on your summary, you can send Gmail out to everybody. I mean, all that kind of, I'm not sure it does what we need to do, but, and I didn't want to question it. I thought about that with the $10,000, out of the box kind of solution. And I realized why, because you can get a solution that works and you don't have to devote 6 months of someone's time. But that, it definitely is worth thinking about that, maybe not with existing resources, but as a priority for the future, because I think it is a very essential thing to be able to draw from that, to draw reports out from the data work we do, particularly if it can be done in a painless way as part of everyday practice. That's my 2 cents.
Yeah. I mean, that's the challenge right now is, we present you logic models and we say we're going to collect data to demonstrate that we're achieving what we say we're going to achieve. And right now we don't have any place to collect that data. We don't have any mechanism to collect that data. We have no way to, if we can't collect that data, we have no way to understand that data, we have no way to evaluate that data. And until we have that in place, we aren't going to make progress. The data visualization is a way to help us visualize that data, but if we don't have that foundation, we're sunk. And that's the piece that the IT staff are working on. And redirecting their time to something else doesn't solve the other challenges we're facing, and it puts us farther behind on this issue.
I think, and with all that, we are, every day for different projects and different needs, we are reporting.
Yes.
And so that is part of the challenge too. Honestly, when it comes to your needs, there's a lot of things I think that would be very valuable to come out of LSDA data that would be great, but probably the most fundamental core thing that you would want is savers. And that's not going to be something that we resolve as an agency, right? We've got data, but tying a reporting system to that is going to be something that's got to happen to that. And we think that they'll get there that low. The time that low. I don't know when that's going to happen, but that's, until that happens, we'd be asking a ton of work, pulling data out of there, reformatting it, and dumping it into some other tool. Yeah. So, I think we're going to talk about, our priorities as far as FTE go. I think probably the biggest thing is that having somebody that all they do is think about this and keep us on course is probably the first step towards not having it drag on.
Right.
So for the commission, I think just keeping us informed, and whether it's a discussion item, so something we will, we can have a working session on, or what your needs are and how we can help. So I think that's a big thing. This discussion has been really great today, because when we first brought this up on our commission work plan, we had a separate subcommittee kind of come together, and I didn't know. You asked us, what do you guys want to know from us? And it was just like, I can't believe you gave us the spreadsheet of how much stuff you're reporting, and I was just like, I don't know what I want from you. And so that's kind of hard, because I think the reason that came onto our work plan in the first place was that we were starting to ask questions and we didn't have immediate data for those questions. But I don't think that they have been consistent questions. So I think it's hard that it's on our work plan, because it's like, until you guys know how to easily report it, and part of that reporting is doing the evaluation. It's hard for us to know what to ask from you. So really cyclical, and so I'm very happy that you guys are thinking about this internally, and also keeping the commission in mind. How can we report this to them? Because I do feel bad that it's on our work plan, but we're not getting any farther to help you either. So, if this needs to be a work session, or if you come up with a solution, don't hesitate to bring it to us and ask us to maybe do the hard work of figuring out how to pay for a solution, or whatever you need us to do. So, thank you guys for doing all the background work, because I think as a commissioner who has been on the subcommittee for the data, I feel absolutely useless. I don't even know what to ask from you guys, because you're already doing so much data collection, and you're already reporting quite a bit. But how can we help you improve that process?
Can I add one more thing to this conversation?
Yes.
Because I was at the Ithaca Next Wave meeting in New York last week, and the Dark Lord himself was there, the chairman of Elsevier, and he was being interviewed by Kevin Guthrie, who's the CEO of Ithaca. And I had a real aha moment during that conversation, and this conversation has made me think of that again, because his name is Y.S. Chi. He's been the chairman of Elsevier for, I think, a long time. And
what's Elsevier?
Elsevier is we know them as a publisher. They are one of the largest publishers of academic journals and databases and other materials. Mm-hmm. And we curse them all the time because their prices are so high, and we spend so much of our budgets on Elsevier. But they're some of the, they control some of the most reputable and high impact journals in the world. It's the journals that everybody wants to publish in. He was talking about the conversation made me realize that we think of them as a publisher. They don't think of themselves as a publisher. They think of themselves as a data analytics business. Mm-hmm. And they became that way back in 1997, or they started the transformation to become that way back in 1997. And it was a lot of hard internal conversations, but they realized that they had a lot of journals and a lot of the market share. They knew that people were using their products, but they didn't know who was using it or why they were using it. So they decided to put all this kind of infrastructure into place to really become a data analytics business. And boom, look what's happened to them. Mm-hmm. I mean, they are one of the biggest publishers now in the world because they have the reporting infrastructure, because they have the collection infrastructure. There are tools that I would encourage you to put into place sooner rather than later. I mean, I understand all this, this issue of we can't get there because we don't have the resources, but this is really, really important, I think, and it could be part of your turning point.
I think so.
So I would encourage you to go at this harder rather than softer. It's going to be painful in the short term, but get it over with and start on that path where you're able to tell your story more effectively.
Thank you.
It's interesting.
It is painful.
I'm
I'll give you that.
getting convinced here by
Well, they've made themselves into an institution that you almost can't run a university without.
That's right.
Well, they
You know,
tried-
so
they tried in
they've made
Holland.
themselves indispensable
That's right.
with that,
That's right.
and
And they have
we have a
long-
we have a
they
lot to
have-
learn from
They
that.
have long seen that shift away from just dealing with journals and databases to now working in all kinds of data. I mean, regardless of what the information is, they consider that data, and they want to be able to collect it, analyze it, and report on it.
Well, I am going to move us forward just because of
Thanks for indulging me.
time. Yes, thank
really
you.
interesting.
Yeah,
No,
it
this
is.
is good conversation. But next on our agenda is our 2019 dates, meeting dates.
And I kind of buried them in your calendar, so I hope you found them there. I just put tentative dates that follow the same pattern of the second Wednesday of the February, April. April's the exception because it's tied to MLA, but June, August, October, and December. We can, of course, move and change any of those as necessary, depending on the actions you take.
I noticed that there are a bunch of Federation meetings in March, and I would just want to note that I'll be gone for a chunk of those. So I won't be able to pull my weight with that, but I'll try to pull my weight someplace else.
So what we need right now is action to approve your regular 2019 commission meetings, and then we can talk about any Federation meeting attendance as well.
I'll move. So move.
Sorry, was there, who did the, okay, Bruce. Is there a second on our meeting dates?
I'll second it.
Any other discussion about the tentative dates?
Yes.
Okay.
However, I will not be available for the June commission meeting.
Would it be better to push it later in the week, in the month?
No, because of ALA.
If it gets pushed,
Oh.
if it gets pushed earlier, I might have trouble.
And so as long as it's just one commissioner, I think we can,
But
if you don't mind Kenning.
And I have a conflict with one too, but it's not, I mean, you can't do much about it. I'm going to be gone in February. I'm leaving after the 5th, the next day.
Mm-hmm.
So I bought my ticket
Oh.
on purpose for 2 days later in case it snows on the 6th. But I've attended these late all through the middle of the night in Australia before, so talking to the closets I know where I come from.
A closet commissioner.
That's what's the bathroom.
Okay. Does anyone have any other conflicts? I think leaving the June meeting there, any earlier would be fine, but I think any later than that makes it harder for people if they're going to be going to ALA to have two travel dates so close to each other. Meaning myself, speaking for myself. All right, so all those in favor of the calendar, please know by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay. these are our dates, and I will make sure to send them to Elsie's office because they were asking last week.
And then we do have Federation meeting dates. If you're available and want to volunteer now, that's great. We also have the February meeting to firm things up.
I put the Tamarack one on my calendar, so I can go to that.
Okay.
I'll commit to Broad Valley.
Okay.
I'm going to wait, but I'm usually the tentative person for Pathfinder.
Okay.
But I haven't made it to the last 3, so I've not been the best Pathfinders Federation person.
So which ones do you still need?
Let's see. South Central, Sagebrush, and Golden Plains.
When's the South Central?
March 16th. Where's Sagebrush?
Sagebrush is going to be in Miles City again. And again, we don't need to commit to them today. If you know you can attend one, great. If not, we can talk about this in February too.
I'll tentatively go to Golden Plains.
Great.
With you, Tracy.
It's a great experience. You were probably not fun.
Do I what? Bird?
Yeah.
You mean shoot him?
The last time I was in the planes, I was accused of being a fun.
Just kidding.
Were you? Are you?
You did shoot them.
Did you have to self-reflect?
I'm sorry?
Did you have to self-reflect? Am I confident?
No, I wouldn't think much thinking, no.
All right.
Okay.
Well, I think we should move on.
Sounds good. Appreciate that, and we can talk about this again in February. I did want to note that Jamie was excused today, so we'll talk to Jamie. Make sure Jamie has these dates as well, in case she's available.
And as you guys saw, they updated the orientation handbook on Montana boards, councils, and commissions.
So Stacy just asked that we share that with you, so.
Thank you.
It's there.
And are we beating a dead horse, or do we still need to discuss the framework at all?
Just remind the commission that we decided not to change it. It's on my to-do list, and I'll be leaning on our managers to try to put a little better definition to what we mean by useful information infrastructure and partnerships, so that it's clear and we can understand what progress we're making in achieving our strategic framework. So that's something that's on our to-do list.
Sorry, I feel like I'm really rushing us through the last part, but I think we should try to end soon so we can do our work session and with weather.
I can say really quickly what
Yes.
the correction was. It was a minor correction, and Eubank noticed that in a document that we entered into public record, we had put the number of schools in Montana instead of the number of librarians in Montana. There's about 200 different, 800 something schools, 600 something, 17 librarian positions. So she just corrected that. Very briefly. That's my understanding.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. So it was just a way to make sure that we got the corrected report in the record.
That's important.
Yep.
That's a big difference.
It is. It is. Yeah.
Okay, so is there any public comment? Any other business or announcements?
I would just like to reflect on the CEIC website, the Census and Economic Indicators Center, which is part of the Department of Commerce. In the good old days, that was an incredibly rich and incredibly deep and wide source of information about demographics, about the economy, workforce, all sorts of economic-related data and demographic-related data for Montana. And now there's almost nothing there available. Yet when you look for Montana demographics or Montana census, you get on Google, you get all these commercial places that are aggregating government data. You know, there were a couple articles in the paper last week about you know, the economy of Montana that I thought were quite interesting, and I just sort of assumed that I didn't need to take particular note of that because that information was readily available online, and it ain't. So I'm not asking the state library to even consider adding new kinds of data, but someone needs to be a steward of that data and make it publicly available. It's incredibly important, and it has to figure in with ours eventually. That's just incredibly important. And it's gone, except on the federal site. But the folks at the CEIC in years past have done all this marvelous job of not only presenting it nicely and usefully, but also breaking it down in ways that would be useful to people who are actually working with it. It was a really splendid website, important information, and it's gone.
Like us, they've faced substantial budget cuts and loss of staff.
I get that. I get all that.
Haven't been funded.
But
right
that's
now.
incredibly important information.
And I realize that not having something tailored to Montana is certainly a big difference, but without knowing specifically what you're looking for, I feel like there's substantially more information available on the federal census site.
I'm sure.
And likely we have access to more information than we did 10 years ago, even with some direct source. But I think there are a lot of what we talked about earlier about library aggregators. The same thing's there. Right? If people aren't going to CEIC to look for that information, you're going to Google. And CEIC is not coming up. And it does bring into the question. I mean, I almost brought that up just about our geospatial data. We've seen that consistently. Not so much, I'm not suggesting we should stop doing our data lists, for example, but we've had a lot of conversations at the national level about all the states doing that kind of function. And even then, there was kind of an attempt to centralize and put it all through district, one big data catalog that everybody used, so that you take the development side costs away from everybody. It's just a matter of submitting your stuff. But that's not what people do research.
No, I would love to be able to figure where droughts are happening in Montana near places with a mean income of less than $30,000. I mean, et cetera. I think that's the kind of thing people go to libraries for, whether they're a physical library or an online library. And I just think I was shocked. I am shocked. And I do think that at some point, even if it's just a cooperating role, the state library has a role, but I would just love to actually just handle all that. If when we were hiring people, we just hired a demographics expert, an economist that had some GIS skills.
It's kind of a double-edged sword though, because I've worked on several housing projects recently, one here in Helena and one right now in Missoula. CIC is still doing some work. I mean, they did an annual housing analysis, which is probably the #1 issue in a lot of towns in Montana, maybe not in rural areas, and they pulled together the cadastral data with the census data to come up with a useful document, because a lot of, there's a lot of, census data in Montana often needs to be taken with a grain of salt unless you're looking at a county level. You go down to the tract level or block group, people still show maps about it, but the margin of error and the sample size is so small from at least we used to do with the census, they used to do, until 2010, they did a 1 out of 7 household sample in the whole country every 10 years when they did the census. because the census just tracks how many people, how many houses, how many over and under 18 for congressional apportionment purposes. And all the other good stuff, how you get to work, all that information, median household income, comes from the
Department of Labor or some of these other sources.
Yeah.
Department of Transportation.
It used to come from the 1 out of 7 household sample, which is this gigantic sample that you can make good inferences about Hamilton, Montana or something. But so there's having a lot of maps doesn't mean that the information is useful, because the margin of error on much of that is so high. People show it on maps, but they don't show the fact that it's not trustworthy, including CIC sometimes.
So, just want to bring it up.
Thank you. Well, we do have a work session after we adjourn the meeting. So if there's no other business or announcements, I'm going to close the meeting at 2:18. We can take a 5-minute break and then come back and meet for our work session. And then, Marlis, do you have a timetable for what you've told the staff?
Well, we told them 3, but we also gave them a notice that we will adjust it as needed.
Okay.
So if you guys think it's going to take you, I mean, by the time you get going again, it's only like half an hour, is that enough time for your work session? I have no clue. I would assume not, but I'm not into it.
I'm also sensitive to the weather.
Yeah, which is pretty bad. So.
It appears to have stopped.
Oh, good.
That's good.
Okay.
But if the roads are not.
Yeah, the roads don't look that great.
We have 2 beds downstairs.